Absolute silence.
The melancholy success of the scarecrow murder. There is a legend about the old scarecrow. Some say he was a man. Others, well, they said he was a monster. People feared him, and right they should, too. He was merciless. That means he didn't give second chances to anyone. He was what they called a slave driver. They were the ones who kept us slaves up and working all day, yelling at us and beating us with clubs and whips if we didn't work fast enough. There were 3 of them. Each of them worked for the master, but I didn't know the other 2, just the scarecrow. We called him that because he was real quiet, never said a word. He was dressed in black, ragged clothes. His skin was the color of ash, and he had no hair. His face was something horrible. It was all shrunk in, like a skeleton's face. His eyes were completely black and hungry looking, and he had dark rings under them. His lips looked like they were scorched, as if he had tried to eat fire. He never did show his teeth. One day we were all a-working out on the plantation, picking cotton. Then I heard a woman scream ahead on the row next to me. It was my mother. She had fallen asleep under the bushes, and the scarecrow had found her. He was roughly dragging her out by her hair. She was all screaming and crying, begging for mercy. But he said nothing. He dropped her and pointed to the ground in front of her with his long, bony finger. Mama understood. She knew what the punishment was for not working. Still sobbing, she knelt down in front of him, murmuring a silent prayer to the gods. "Mama, no!" I yelled. The scarecrow slowly turned his head back and looked at me. I bit my lip so hard it bled, trying to keep from crying. His eyes were filled with a horrible hunger I've never seen in anything before, man or beast alike. I quickly looked away. I knew there was nothing I could do to stop him. My mother almost died. He whipped her for over an hour, and when he was done, he signaled for us to move her back to the shed that we all slept in. After the others had left, I had washed her wounds and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Mama. It's okay. You're all right. It's okay." She didn't respond. I kept washing her back and arms and whispering in her ear. After the others came back, I let the women take care of her and slept fitfully for the night. I awoke very early the next morning, well before anyone else did. I had a nightmare. I dreamt that my mother was dead. As I reached out to touch her, her face fell apart, and Scarecrow was there, grinning at me with those awful eyes. I shook my head again to clear the gruesome image. I made a decision. I sneaked into the master's house and found a knife in the kitchen and hid it underneath my belt. Then I walked back to the shed and found that it was empty. That meant that everyone was already out in the fields. As I ran out to the fields, the scarecrow grabbed me. He glared into my eyes, and this time I looked right back at him. After a while, he smiled and let go of me. He quickly pulled out his whip to hit me, but I was faster. I leapt at him and pulled the knife out of my belt. He tried to hit me with the handle of the whip, but I ducked, jumped forward, and stabbed him in the chest. The scarecrow screamed and fell, shaking violently against the ground. Then he stopped, suddenly, and lay very still. He looked up at the breaking dawn and closed his eyes. I knew then that the scarecrow was dead. The master later hired a new slave driver, but by then my mother and I had already left the plantation, fleeing north to escape slavery and become free. I still have the knife I stole from the plantation. Every now and then I'll take it out and look at it, and know there will always be a legend behind it. The legend of how I killed the scarecrow and won my freedom.